Hi, everyone. This is Michael Tierra and of the East-West School of Planetary Herbology, and it's my honor to conduct an interview with my dear friend and colleague, uh, Roy Upton. Hi, Roy.
Hey, Michael, nice to see you.
Um, to tell you anything about the background of Roy, I know a lot, but he has had many accomplishments in his life as an herbalist. What Roy has done since all of that is without particularly any serious credentials, I might add. He's forged a path for himself where which makes him practically an equal of any scientist on herbal medicine in the world. As a matter of fact, what he did was something that was outrageous that everybody thought was impossible, and he founded something called the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, which I'm going to have him talk about a little bit. American Herbal Pharmacopoeia is like practically it is the major resource in the industry for the properties of herbs. And unlike other pharmacopoeias, because every major country in the world either has or intends to have a pharmacopoeia of their indigenous medicinal plants, and America didn't have one. And typically, it's a college university with a battery of researchers and students and everybody else making such a thing. He did all this single-handedly, learned enough science so that he has earned the respect of everybody he speaks to around the world about it, and so this is a major accomplishment, and the herbal industry as a whole and herbalists as a whole owe him a great debt for what he's done with this. And most uniquely of all is that he includes the actual traditional uses of the plants in his pharmacopoeia. A lot of pharmacopoeias just talk about science and all that thing, but Roy's pharmacopoeia, which I think everyone should refer to as a major reference, includes the traditional uses. I got that right, Roy?
Yes, pretty much.
Okay. So let's see what are you doing with the pharmacopoeia now?
There's a number of things we're doing. At any given time, we're working on 7 or 8 monographs. So right now we work on Yerba Santa, which Yerba Santa monograph has never been done in any pharmacopoeia. We did a monograph on Osha that had never been done before.
Really?
Monographs on cramp bark, black haw, so indigenous herbs that have never been done before and don't appear in any other pharmacopoeia. So right now we work on Yerba Santa, we work on yarrow, elderberry, saffron. Those are a few of the ones that we're working on currently. And then, as I mentioned before we started, the last few weeks have been occupied with doing a mini monograph on mulberry, because there was reportedly a woman who died in Sacramento in December of last year. And on autopsy, they found a fragment of a leaf in her stomach, which they subsequently identified as mulberry leaf, sangya, which is used in Chinese medicine for respiratory stuff. And because of that, somehow they determined that that caused her death. But nobody can figure out how they made that assessment, because virtually everybody knows who knows mulberry knows that it's non-toxic, and there's formal clinical and toxicological studies that show it to be non-toxic. So we don't know how they made that leap, but that forces me to write a report about it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that you're really a resource for just about every herbalist in this country who wants to find out what's going on with these various claims of herbal toxicity and things like that. I know you're top of my list when I want to know any of those things. But with all of this, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that Roy is a first-class herbalist on all levels, and he treats people regularly, sometimes over the telephone as the line director of Planetary Formulas, but also person to person. So, in that respect, I think that Roy, you've made a unique niche for yourself in this industry, and I thank you for it. So there's a tendency to try to find anything bad about herbs and then blow it up. Why do you think that is?
I think it's just the conventional medical mentality where they think that what they provide has been proven to be safe and effective, whereas supplements have not been proven to be safe and effective in the same way that they think their drugs are. Now, in the first part of that, there's nothing that can be farther from the truth, in that most of the medical modalities that are used are not proven to be safe and effective when you actually look at the science. And that could be a whole, discussion in and of itself.
A very long discussion I would have had.
Yeah, but because supplements aren't regulated in the exact same way that pharmaceuticals are, that gives the conventional medical people a misperception that they're not regulated sufficiently. And again, the opposite is the truth, is that it's a highly regulated industry. Ingredients have to be safe. Claims that are made have to be truthful and not misleading. They have to be documentable. The products have to be made by good manufacturing practices that are overseen by FDA. Claims are also overseen by Federal Trade Commission, including FDA. So there's a plethora serious adverse effects associated with supplements by law have to be reported to FDA. So there's a plethora of regulation to ensure the safety of supplements. But most medical and conventional people don't know that those laws even exist.
Yeah, this is a very important point to be made, because that's almost anything you read from conventional sources on the news, the media, and so forth, says it's an unregulated industry, and so you can't trust anything in it. In what way do you think they could see it as unregulated?
Again, just simply because they're not regulated. So, for example, pharmaceutical medications, before they come onto the market, they have to be pre-approved by FDA. So there's a perception that the government has given a stamp of approval that a certain medication or medical device is safe and effective for its intended use. Most of the herbs and the foods that we use, peppermint, elderberry, mulberry, echinacea, these have been on the market for generations and generations. Triphala for more than 1,000 years. So these have been in the public domain. And because of that, they don't have to be prior approved by FDA in order to be sold as a dietary supplement. And I should qualify that by saying these types of ingredients that were on the market prior to 1994 are accepted because they were in the public domain. They weren't causing any known health hazard. Otherwise, FDA would have taken them off the market already. And so they don't have to be prior approved by FDA. Because of that, medical practitioners have the perspective that these have not been proven to be safe. They've not been proven to be effective. The government has not, reviewed and approved of these, and therefore it's unregulated. That's their perception.
Right. And as a result, there have been a lot of herbs that have been withdrawn from commerce because of different claims of causing side effects. It's my opinion that anything can cause a side effect. when it's taken improperly or in the wrong amount. That's basically one of the basic rules of herbal medicine. And so how much of a risk and how much of an adverse number of reactions would justify withdrawing an herb from the market?
Well, if you look at ephedra is probably
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
was the primary example. That's the most recent one that had been actually removed from the market for use as a dietary supplement. Adverse effects, there were hundreds. Deaths, there were very few, but there were a few, but that were attributable to ephedra, mostly being used as part of energy or weight loss products, mostly weight loss products. So that was enough. Just those few were enough to remove ephedra from the market. But there's a bigger story in that, those products were being used inappropriately. Ephedra wasn't being used in the same way that traditional practitioners would typically use ephedra. The dosages that were being used were higher than a traditional practitioner mostly would use. And originally, FDA had actually considered leaving traditional ephedra products on the market. They said that the problem wasn't with traditional ephedra products. The problem was with ephedra weight loss and energy products. And so they were going to leave traditional ephedra products alone. Unfortunately, an herb company out of Utah sued FDA over their ephedra restrictions. And so FDA dug their heels in and said, you know what, we were on the fence. We were going to leave traditional ephedra products alone, but you've pushed us into a corner. Now we're just going to ban them for use in dietary supplements, and that was the end of ephedra.
Right. And I, for one, as a herbalist, considered that a huge loss. And I don't think that the herbal industry and the herbalists in general put up enough of a fight to deal with that effectively. They just let it happen.
Yeah, and I completely agree. The herbal industry, in my opinion, messed up because they should have just gone to the FDA and said, we agree with you. We should leave the traditional herbal products alone, but we should restrict their use in highly concentrated amounts in weight loss and energy products. But they wanted the cake and eat it too. They wanted to keep their weight loss and energy products. So they pushed the FDA pushed them into a corner. Saddest part for me is in most of these things, the herbalist community is nowhere to be heard. Many times I'm the only herbalist that's at the table in these discussions, then my voice is only one. And we should have had a coalition of acupuncturists, naturopaths, herbalists, integrated medical practitioners, all speaking in one voice to leave those preparations alone. And FDA probably would have left them alone. But the herbalist community does not have any voice of political power whatsoever.
And that's because I think there's just rampant disunity amongst the herbalist community. And everybody's just out for their own short-term gain or win without looking at the long-term consequences. And I'm very aware of you in many of the arenas that have happened in the last 20 or more years, being the only person interacting with government agencies on behalf of herbalists and not having the support that you should be getting from acupuncture colleges, from acupuncture organizations, from herbal organizations, from the American Herbalist Guild, which we both founded. They're notoriously backed out of all of this. Everybody wants to defend their own petty little point at the sacrifice of the whole. And so that, and oftentimes it left you holding the bag in front of these agencies by yourself, and I regret that, and I consider you a hero in that respect.
No, thank you for the kind words.
Yeah. So, and this interview is really important to understand how key Roy is, and for everybody to understand how key Roy Upton is in relationship to knowing what's going on in the herbal industry. Besides the fact that I don't want to lose sight of the fact that he is an herbalist. He practices whenever he can, and he's really good at it. And he's also the line director of Planetary Formulas, now Planetary Herbals, which is a herbal industry that basically based on my own formulas that I created and gave to the industry. And as it's been going, how long has it been happening now, Roy?
I think we're at probably about 36 years.
36 years for Planetary Herbals and Planetary Formulas. And it's gone through a lot of changes in that whole process. And because I mean, what herbalist would not want to have the guy who creates the herbal pharmacopoeia in charge of his products and representing him in the marketplace, but Roy Upton. So I have always felt extremely blessed to have you in that place. And right now, I know you're sitting in your office at Threshold Company, who manufactures these products. But because Roy is such an outstanding herbalist, I also saw to it that he created a number of formulas within the Planetary Herbal line. Can you name some of them, Roy?
The key,
many of them I use a lot, so go ahead.
well, the flagship is Reishi Mushroom Supreme, which I actually developed for my mom to support healthy immunity in my mom. So it's a primary Reishi astragalus mushroom formula for supporting healthy immunity. So that's pretty much the flagship. Tri-Cleanse was the second one, which was a combination of Trifla, which obviously you introduced to the industry, to the American natural products food industry, almost 40 years ago, and formulated that. Those are the two main ones I've formulated, but I've had my fingers in a number of them, as you know, over the years.
Yeah. And Reishi Mushroom Supreme is something I prescribe all the time. It's a matter of course that if anyone has a cancer, for instance, it's just a matter of course that I would give them Reishi Mushroom Supreme, not with the idea of curing them of cancer with it, but because it's called a Fuzheng formula, which is a formula that supports the immune system, and it can be used to used for any immunodeficiency diseases, of which there's most diseases are. So that's Reishi Mushroom Supreme. I highly recommend that formula as a immune tonic, a Fuzheng tonic. Roy, can you talk a little bit about just so people understand what industry actually is up against when they create a line of herbal products? A little bit about what kind of laws and regulations Threshold has to go through under your supervision as well in order to actually approve an herb or a product in their line. Because I don't think people realize how big that is.
Yeah, again, that could be a whole segment in of itself, but in a nutshell, first is that you have to use ingredients that are considered to be safe. And those ingredients are ingredients that have been on the market prior to 1994, which is when the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act was passed. So all the ingredients, food ingredients and herbal ingredients that were on the market as supplements type products prior to 1994, those are all considered safe. If you want to bring a new dietary ingredient, a new herb into the market, for example, you just came back from Africa, or if you learned about a good herb for an herb that got you excited in Africa and wanted to bring it into the line, but it was never in the American market before, that would have to be pre-approved by FDA. You would have to do safety evaluations. submit that as a new dietary ingredient to FDA, and they would have to approve it before you brought it out of the market. Second is that you have to have facilities that are GMP compliant with good manufacturing practices as outlined by FDA. And FDA maintains the regulatory authority to inspect and to look at analytical data, facilities, hygiene, standard operating procedures, everything. Everything from the bathroom to the calibration of scales.
And while I might know something about that, it'd be good for you to mention is Threshold have they had to go through that process?
Oh yeah, I have, but have been for better part of 30 years. We're actually, in the past, we were third-party certified, GMP certified by NSF International. Currently, we're GMP certified by Underwriters Laboratory, which is the UL, which we all grew up knowing, Underwriters Laboratories.
Right.
So they have a certification program that's a third-party program to ensure that you actually are meeting GMPs as required by law. The products have to be labeled in a manner that is truthful and not misleading. They have to be free of pathogenic microbes so that you're not getting people sick as you put these out onto the market. Every ingredient that comes in the door has to be tested for identity, purity, strength, and composition, and absence of adulterants. Every claim that's made, like structure and function claim, supports healthy immunity, supports healthy sleep, have to be truthful and not misleading. And you have to have, if FDA ever knocks on your door and says, we want to see the documentation of why you make that claim, we have to be able to provide that documentation within a reasonable amount of time. And each of those claims have to be submitted to FDA so that FDA can review it to make sure that we're not making illegal drug claims. So these days, it takes a tremendous amount of effort to have an herbal company that can actually do that. We know many traditional herbalists that had great companies, they were great herbalists, but they weren't able to meet the good manufacturing requirements. And so they either closed their doors or they stopped manufacturing on their own and contracted with other manufacturers to do their products who could meet GMPs. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources. It's not as easy as it once was when we started like 35, 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's a mixed blessing in a way to have that much regulation heaped on herbs. I mean, fundamentally, herbs are things of nature, which means they come out of the dirt, and not all dirt is the same. So some dirt has more metals in it because there's a certain amount in soil throughout the world, and so essentially, herbs have to meet the same qualifications as food.
Much more than foods.
Okay, even though they're taken in such small amounts that anything that would be in it that's not so great is hardly enough to cause a problem with most people. But in California, you correct me if I'm wrong, which is the biggest market in the entire United States for supplements. Am I right about that, Roy?
It's probably true. I just don't know for sure.
California has another hoop to have to jump over, and maybe you can talk a little bit about Proposition 65, Roy.
Yeah, Prop 65 to me is such a farce. It originally was developed to ensure the purity of water. And before the bill was even finished, the first thing they exempted from it was water. So go figure. The law was based to ensure the purity of water. The first thing they did was say, well, because water is controlled by municipalities who already have their own standards, we therefore are going to exempt water from Prop 65. But what they and the premise was to keep metals like lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, things like this out of the food chain. And so they created lists and lists and lists of ingredients that had the potential to have and everything has the potential to have metals, but they basically created a list. And they say that if you have a product that has a certain amount of lead or a certain amount of mercury or cadmium in it, that you have to put a warning on the label that says this contains chemicals known to the state of California to cause reproductive toxicity or cancer or things like that. So virtually everything has that potential. So what happened though, you had lawyers that would just go out and test products to find people that were over the, for example, the lead limit. And then they would turn that company into the state of California. And then they would basically get their lawyers on the phone and say, we want $200,000 to go away. And this happened for a good 10 to 15 years. And that's all they were looking for. They were just looking for quick settlement money. The courts kind of figured that out and made it more difficult so that frivolous lawsuits couldn't be brought. But it's a ridiculous notion because the amount of the metal that is required to be disclosed is 1,000 times lower than the no negative effect level. 1,000 times lower. So it's a completely ridiculous law. And virtually, if you really wanted to do things right, you'd put that label on virtually everything. I don't know if you remember, but for about 6 months, every time you walked into a grocery store and walked over to the fish where the fresh fish was, there was a sign that said, the state of California has identified fish as a Prop 65 hazard,
right.
Buy at your own risk. And the fish industry put the kibosh on that really quickly.
Yeah,
The
I still think about that when I
industry,
go to
the
the
wine
website.
industry, the industries that have the power to do it just went to the state and said, we're not going to do it. And if you make us do it, we're going to sue you. And they went away.
So that's again a weakness of the unity within the herbal industry, and a weakness amongst herbalists that we don't create a situation where we actually have a voice in such things. Which at this point, I think, with the amount of money that the herbal industry is making, I don't know what it is the current figure on a yearly basis. You know offhand, Roy?
There's different quotes out there, but it's
Yeah.
anywhere from 36 to $54 billion a year for the industry. But I think what's important not to conflate is the herbal industry with the herbalist community. Those are two very different communities.
They are.
The industry has the money, the herbalist community does not. The industry has the political clout, the herbalist has no voice. Naturopaths and acupuncturists, they have some voice, but the Western herbal or the traditional herbal community has no voice whatsoever. It's, in my opinion, in the political realm of things, but the industry does.
Right, but the herbalists could participate with the herbal industry to make a stronger voice, and they don't do it.
Absolutely. I think Ephedra was the perfect example. They should have, as a group of practitioners, in my opinion, they could have rallied to go to the industry and say, listen, we don't agree with the use of ephedra in weight loss and energy products. Please stop trying to defend those products. Please accept FDA's, offer of leaving traditional ephedra respiratory products alone. Would they have done it? Difficult to say. But in hindsight, at least we should have tried.
Well, as a both you to a certain extent, and certainly me even longer, uh, a driving force from the very beginning to make herbal medicine a popular thing. I mean, I remember communicating with each other and saying, "My God, Walgreens is selling herbal supplements." That was a big deal. Now you find it in Safeway in every store in the country. We all started somewhat from a reactionary standpoint because we were reacting to the first of all, it was a counterculture. We were trying to create there was a political aspect to it, even though it wasn't foremost in my mind. I know it was part of it, and there was the aspect of when people say, why go to herbs? There was an aspect of the fact that increasingly people were becoming aware of side effects, not only short-term effects, but long-term side effects from the use of Western medicines, that there was an interest in wanting to try herbs instead. And that's when people say, why did the herbal industry take off? It took off not because people just like herbs more, because they're not that easy to take, if you want to know the truth. It took off because of the shortcomings of the established medical industry. As much as I've made my peace with that, realizing that there are things that that Western conventional medicine has made great contributions in the health of America and in the world, so that we should be working together, and there is a movement in doing that to a certain extent between Western medicine and herbalists. But I don't know. What do you think about all that, Roy?
I'm a little bit mixed. I don't see on the health side of things, I don't see conventional medicine offering almost anything. And when when you look at statistics, and I qualify it from a health perspective, in virtually every metric that's measured regarding health, infant mortality, obesity, cancer, diabetes, arthritis, heart disease, longevity, the mental health. The United States is virtually behind every other similarly developed nation from a healthcare perspective. So they don't provide healthcare. They pretty much only provide disease care. From that perspective, I agree with you that if I get into a car accident and my arm gets cut off, I don't want an acupuncturist or an herbalist putting cayenne pepper on my arm, right? I want to go to the emergency room and get my arm sewed back on. But that's about where it ends. I was looking at papers today in addressing this issue about mulberry, the alleged mulberry toxicity, and I looked at a half a dozen papers today. Throughout the entire medical literature in the United States and internationally, it's replete with articles of how the American medical system is broken, and they don't know how to fix it. We have the most expensive system on earth, but we have the worst healthcare statistics to show for it. From the perspective of working together, I believe that every human being should work together on anything. I don't care. Global warming, health, food security. We should all be working together on everything. But I also have to say, while there are great strides that have been made, for example, the integration of Chinese medicine into the Cleveland Clinic, integrated medicine programs from medical schools in the United States, Andy Weil's integrated medicine program out of University of Arizona is probably the flagship of that. There's not enough integration of philosophy, of the belief that the human organism has the ability to heal itself, given the right motivation to do it, and the fact that lifestyle is 90% of the battle, and the herbal medicine really is 10% or 20%, depending on what stage of healthcare delivery you're talking about. Right. So to me, there's not enough integration on the philosophical side, even though, everybody, get 80% of Americans that use some type of supplement in a year. You got more especially with COVID. Even with COVID, more docs started to warm up to the idea of using vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, N-acetylcysteine, and a host of nutrients for prevention of COVID or reduction of severity of COVID. So that's been a game changer in terms of getting physicians to look at the value of some supplements. But there's still, Michael, in my opinion, a huge chasm, philosophically speaking. They think predominantly pharmacologically, whereas if in my opinion, if we're practicing herbal medicine correctly, we're thinking more physiologically, not more pharmacologically. They're strictly thinking pharmacologically and not how to restore homeostasis in the human being.
So getting back to the question of individual herbs, and they're losing, they're being condemned in the marketplace because of pharmacological research that, for instance, in comfrey finds pyrrolizidine alkaloids in comfrey. This grates strongly against my personal experience and the experience of millions of people who, before this was found out, were using comfrey in green drinks and all kinds of things that we never heard of. And so I know that you have pharmacological information extensively in all of your American herbal pharmacopoeia. Is something that I think everybody, whether they want to practice or full commerce based on that information or not, at least it's there. But I wonder what you think about the idea that an herb that might be used for centuries all of a sudden is being accused of causing problems, like comfrey or Ho Shou Wu, Polygonum multiforum. And I particularly after having been in South Africa and talking to a native herbalist there. By native, I don't mean he was uneducated. He knew his stuff, but he was pretty much self-educated. And having him extol the virtues of Devil's Club, which I intend to write about. But I think it's already out there. There's a lot written on Devil's Club. And but the one thing that doesn't come out is a lot of times what is the dose? Because when you're talking about pharmacological, you're talking about finding molecules or things or constituents in a plant, of which there's hundreds, and dose oftentimes doesn't figure into the equation, and that's fundamental in herbal medicine. And asking him about the dose of Devil's Club, I think people would be very surprised to hear that basically while in the West we're saying small doses for a short period of time of Devil's Club, he's bringing out his wife, who's taking 3 heaping tablespoons a day of Devil's Club powder, and has done it for years to treat her lumbago and other and maintain health. So it's a major herb in South Africa. And the same thing with comfrey, and yet these herbs are kind of restricted by pharmacology. What's your opinion about that, Roy?
Well, it's kind of two sides. So the first one has to do with the herbs that have been used traditionally, and then somebody says there's a toxic compound, stop using it, like comfrey and PAs. So you have to tease apart the literature. So some species of comfrey or some phytum are higher in PAs than others. So the Russian species of comfrey, Symphytum uplandicum, Symphytum asperula, these were higher in PAs than the comfrey that we were used to using, Symphytum officinalis. But the comfrey also hybridizes very readily. So sometimes it's very difficult to know if you really have pure officinal. The amount of PAs in Symphytum officinal is probably too low. to cause any kind of PA toxicity unless you already have a compromised liver. But also there's a risk of pregnant women. If you're pregnant and when the liver is developing in utero, and if you're taking something that has a liver toxic compound like a PA, then that's a special risk situation. So I think we have to tease it out. You can't just say, oh, they're wrong about telling us about the dangers of PAs. We've been drinking it as a green drink and we're all alive, right? You have to, the truth is somewhere in the middle there. And then I think as practitioners, you have to say, is it responsible to give a pregnant woman comfrey tea simply because you believe that it's safe, even though science says that these compounds might be toxic to the liver? The body has a detoxification system that actually allows for the elimination of PAs, of pyrolysidine alkaloids. So
Oh, I
then,
didn't know that.
yeah. So as long as that mechanism is working, there's not a big problem consuming low amounts of the PAs. The problem where it comes is when you get people that are having to consume large amounts of PAs, and also not all PAs are equally toxic. The PAs that are in comfrey are relatively mild, but the PAs in Senecio are relatively toxic. So that's where most of the real world toxicity comes from, is from Senecio and other PA containing plants. But I will give you an example where Western science did inform us of something that wasn't known. And this is with the use of Fangji or Stephania in Chinese medicine. Well, in China, there were two species that were used as Fangji, Han Fangji, Guang Fangji. So Han Fangji was Stephania, Guang Fangji was Aristolochia. Aristolochia contains aristolochic acid, which is highly nephrotoxic, toxic to the kidneys, and also can cause intestinal cancer if taken for a long period of time. I don't know if he'll remember this, but so these got mixed up in trade.
Very well.
One is completely safe, the Stephania, where the other one is potentially toxic. And but they would get mixed up in trade, and people didn't know this. So there's probably an estimated 2,000 people that died because of aristolochic acid toxicity or lost their kidneys, mostly in Belgium and France. They were doing other things too. It wasn't just the aristolochia. But nevertheless, that was probably one of the worst herbal toxicities in our time. But it was modern science that identified that aristolochic acid was the problem. And since then, it's been banned. The aristolochic acid containing plants have been banned worldwide, except in small dosages, like wild ginger has aristolochic acid, but in such small amounts that it's not a big deal. So China and Hong Kong, for example, allow for it to continue to be used as long as you don't have aristolochic acid in that product. So there's some things that science has exaggerated, and there's other things that science has informed us of that can make us safer practitioners for sure. And aristolochic acid is one of them.
Yeah, this issue about mulberry is almost ridiculous. It reaches the level of being ridiculous, in my opinion. I think I read someplace that mulberry leaf is even consumed as a food by some people, but I'm not sure about that.
No, it's true. It's been used as fodder in animals. Literally, I asked the Chinese person on the street last week, and I said, "I'm so. Do you know sangye? You know, which is
Right.
the mulberry leaf."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we know sangye. And I said, "Have you ever cooked with it?" She says, "Oh yeah, my mother and my aunt used to pick young, fresh leaves, cut them up into small pieces, and steam or stir fry them with other vegetables. Routinely used as a food throughout all of Asia. I actually ate like 2 or 3 leaves last week just to see if I was going to die." But and it's actually they're hard to, it's difficult to eat a fresh leaf.
It is.
They're very, very rough and abrasive.
Yeah.
As soon as you chew into it, it totally turns mucilaginous, but it also disintegrates like almost completely. So we have a hard time understanding how this woman got a 1 inch by 2 inch piece of leaf intact in her stomach. We, I wrote, yeah, I wrote an episode of Longmire doing this whole investigatory thing,
I
and
love that.
anyway, so but mulberry was a ridiculous thing, and I think the woman who actually first reported on it and she just wrote a scathing report of the supplement industry, but then 3 weeks later wrote a completely different article doing what we're doing, calling into question how did the coroner determine that mulberry actually caused this, because everybody in the world says it's super safe. Andy Ellis said that he considered it like the fourth safest Chinese herb that there is in the whole materia medica, you know.
Right. Yeah, mulberry is like the whole tree is medicinal in Chinese medicine, and it yet has come. It is yet to come into its own in Western herbal medicine, which is another interesting point. Which is what gets us back to planetary products. Why is it called planetary? And of course, I came up with the name, and think and I'm grateful for the fact that Ira went along with it. But at the time when I proposed the idea there isn't different herbs in the world. There's no such thing as a Chinese herb or Ayurvedic herb. There's just herbs, and it's up to us to discover their uses and their value, and we can then figure them into whatever system of herbal medicine we want, which is cultural. But planetary herbalism basically means embracing all of the wisdom of and herbs that are available on Earth as we learn them, as well as the principles that seem to hold true to all of those systems. So that's how I saw planetary herbalism. And again, I encountered some infighting in that process. The Chinese doctors and Chinese people thought that it wasn't pure. It's got to be Chinese, and you can't mix it up. One guy said we have enough trouble learning Chinese medicine, let alone learning the Western herbs and herbs in India and everywhere else. I said that's too bad, because some of those herbs may be even better. Like I think echinacea as an example. There's no Chinese herb that I know is comparable to echinacea in terms of its ability to treat infections, and it's how fast it works for infections. And so there are unique things in every continent, and North America, and so I got to be identified as a Chinese herbalist. And I said, no, I'm a Western herbalist that practices Chinese medicine some of the time. So that's me, and I know that you follow a similar philosophy, I think, Roy. Am I correct about that?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I started, learning about Western herbs from a Native American perspective,
Me too.
and, and then went to the Caribbean and kind of studied bush medicine there. You introduced me to Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine through the East-West course. Then I did the apprenticeship with you in clinic and went to 5 branches, and also went to Shanghai University to traditional Chinese medicine. And then after my partner Diane and I went to study Ayurvedic medicine in Mount Madonna, the Institute of Ayurveda at Mount Madonna. So very much an eclectic, have eclectic orientation, though I do believe that the Chinese model of diagnostics and developing therapeutics is that's my grounding more than anything else, because I think that gives us the most clinically relevant orientation that can be used to help more patients. Ayurveda, in contrast, gives more of the lifestyle stuff that
Exactly.
people need. But as far as being developed, at least in this country, I don't think it's as well developed clinically as Chinese medicine is. There's just so much in Chinese medicine that's available now that's not available on the Ayurvedic side that still is a big part of my grounding.
Right. Um, I don't know. I don't know that you would be surprised, but I certainly was, because I tend to be critical of quasi pseudo diagnostic methods based on psychic or sorcery or things like that. But I was absolutely blown away by the fact that when I was in South Africa, uh, shamanic medicine was striving to become a legal profession in South Africa. There's thousands of people who practice it. There's even schools that you go to for it, and herbalists don't actually diagnose at all. They send you to the shamanic diagnostician called um, Sangoma. I think that's the name. I think I messed it up a little bit. Anyway, the Sangoma. The Sangoma could be a male or a female, and they have a little bag full of these bones, which they throw for you, and then they don't you don't tell them anything about your problems at all. They tell you what's wrong. But we had one person do that for Leslie, and it was kind of I don't know, I don't know what to make out of it. Anyway, she threw the bones, and she said, "Well, your great grandfather is trying to get in touch with you. He has something very important to tell you." So there's a lot of ancestor stuff that goes on in the healing process. And then she has special powders that are made by chemists, and I have no idea what they are, what's in them, or anything else. But she goes to the chemist who makes these powders for her, and they're different colors, and you give them to people, and they can bathe with them or put them on their body in whatever way. As far as I know, no, I don't know if they're taken internally. And then some of the sangomas also know something about herbs. They might recommend some herbs. Uh, as far as I know, they're practically never formulas, but they generally defer to the herbalist. And based on the sangoma's diagnosis, the herbalist creates the formula. So the herbalist that I saw was purportedly the most outstanding herbalist in Zimbabwe, near Lake Victoria, which is everybody goes to him, and he works with a sangoma, and in his property he has a special hut where she sees people, and she gives a diagnosis to him, and he gives the formula, or he gives the herbal prescription. So if I didn't get to see any of that whatsoever. However, it was interesting that the herbalist doesn't do any diagnosis. He might talk about lifestyle, he might talk about diet, but he doesn't get to actually see a diagnosis. It brings up the question of, what is the disease? Do you need to have a disease to need to be treated? But then he held forth for like a half hour. I've got this all videotaped on the use of Devil's Club, and when I get brought away from that is the idea that you can use he uses one herb that treats almost everything, so the diagnosis doesn't mean a whole lot. That's sort of what I got from it. I could be wrong about that, but uh, it certainly is not Chinese medicine, and but yet it seems to have some validity within that culture, and and uh, and there are herbs that we can take out of that culture, like Devil's Claw, and find great value in it. But then I started looking it up in the Western sources on the internet, all the different sources on it, and they talk about its possible toxicity, and taking it in small doses, and toxicity to the liver and all this stuff. And and I guess when he called his wife in to say how much was she taking, he was trying to counter all that because he used a lot of it, more than we would ever imagine, more than most people could stomach, I dare say. So, what do you think, Roy, about that? Do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, well, always get thoughts on everything. I was actually looking up to see how. So the Botanical Safety Handbook classifies it as a 1A.
Right.
Yeah, so that means safe for mostly everybody and no clinically relevant drug interactions. So I don't know where the information is coming that is potentially, toxic, but I haven't heard that. And the BSH represents pretty much the most comprehensive review of herbal ingredients anywhere in the world. But again, you brought up two issues. One is that shamanistic practice. That's the nature of shamanistic practice, is you use one herb for 100 things rather than 100 herbs for one thing, right? Actually, that's the original way that I was taught.
It was, huh?
With Rolling Thunder. Sometimes they would talk about that, you might use 1, 2, or 3, maybe 4 herbs. And like for an Arapaho tradition where, I also have some background from an Arapaho perspective, is that may have 4 herbs that they use for everything.
Right.
But it's because they have that shamanistic relationship with that botanical. Whereas the herbalists were different. They would use many herbs for many things. So you had medicine people and you had medicine people, 2 different types of medicine people. So what you expressed in the South African person, that's classical of shamanistic herbal practice. But it does lack that diagnostic grounding. So I think it depends. You can have a shamanistic practitioner who's really skilled at what they do and gets great results with their patients. And then you can have the most academically astute practitioner that went to university up to yin yang and passed all sorts of tests,
right,
but is a terrible practitioner. So, and vice versa. You can have a really, well educated, good practitioner, well educated, bad practitioner. Same thing on the shaman side. So we always have to be diligent about who we go to, why we go to them, and whether or not they resonate with us. And where the rubber meets the road, are we getting better? And if I'm getting better, I don't care if somebody, blowed whiskey on, like they do in Creole country in Louisiana, they spit whiskey at you, If I get better, I don't really care if, what system they used, but that's me. But then again, I still stick with what I know from a clinically relevant perspective in therapeutics and diagnostics and information about materia medica. And so that's my, even though I have the familiarity and grounding with that other world of herbal medicine, I still very much live in the world of clinical, botanical medicine from a, Chinese Ayurvedic Western perspective.
right. Well, this conversation can go on between us for a long, long time, but it's the question of the endurance of the people who watch us talking back and forth. And we always have a great conversation about herbs when we get together. It's one of the fun things about being an herbalist and talking to my colleagues, because we always have great things to share. And one of the things about being an herbalist is that it's a community, and still, by and large, it's a very special community where people can come from all sorts of different places, Christian, shaman, all different political things, and all that set aside as soon as we start talking about herbs. I've seen that over and over again amongst my students and with other herbalists. And so, Roy, is there any last minute things that you wanted to say? I encourage everybody who takes the time to do these interviews with me to promote themselves in any way that that it would be beneficial so people can take advantage of you. I know the herbal pharmacopoeia would be one thing to say how can they connect with that, and do you have a website or address or any other ways that you would like to
Yeah, it's really easy to find us. Just Google if anybody. I'm always open to talking to anybody about anything herbal wise. So that's the first invitation I'll put out there. The second is that I'm easy to find. Roy Upton Herbalist or American Herbal Pharmacopoeia. I'm very easy to find, and whatever I can do to support anybody else in the world of herbal medicine, I'm happy to do. So I think that's the single best thing I can say.
yeah, that's one place where you and I are absolutely on the same page. Well, thank you so much, Roy, for this time. I'm sure the public is going to get a lot from this, and I hope that more and more people will see these. And I've got several others scheduled, and I'm going to probably want to do another one with you in the future. So I'll let you know.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Roy.
Take care.
Bye.